First thing I noticed when I came back to myself wasn't pain, it was the smell. Antiseptic and recycled air and something underneath it, something floral and wrong, like a candle burning in a room with no windows. I blinked at the ceiling, white, institutional, the kind of white that says don't ask questions. My wrist had a tube in it. I turned my head slowly, the way you do when your body hasn't decided yet if it's going to cooperate. The chair beside my bed was empty. A folded blanket sat on the seat like someone had left in a hurry and planned to come back. There was a cup of orange juice on the tray table, still sealed. Nobody had opened it. Nobody had been there long enough. I'm Maya, I'm 31, and I build websites for a living. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job that makes people lean forward at dinner parties. I work from a second bedroom, I convert it into an office, and I take calls with clients in 3 time zones. And I have been the person in my family who handles things since I was 19 years old, and my parents sat me down to tell me the accounts were overdrawn. That was the first ask. It wasn't the last. My brother Caden is 4 years younger than me and has never once been asked to handle anything. He plays semi-professional poker. Not the televised kind, the kind where you drive 3 states over on a Thursday and come back Sunday with either a story or a debt. Usually a debt. Our mother calls it his gift. She says some people are built for risk, and some people are built for stability, and that I should be grateful I'm the stable one because stability is a blessing. For 12 years, I was grateful on command. The hospital room had a window. Outside it, a parking garage. Gray concrete, a yellow painted line, a minivan with a bumper sticker I couldn't read from that distance. I stared at it for a long time because it was easier than thinking about why the chair was empty. A nurse came in around what I guessed was noon. Name tag said Priya. She had the efficient warmth of someone who genuinely likes her job, but has also seen everything twice. "You're awake," she said. "Good." She checked my monitors with the focused expression of someone reading a language they're fluent in. "How do you feel?" "Like I lost an argument with gravity," I said. Her mouth tilted. "That's about right." She paused, glanced toward the door. "Did someone call you? Do you have family coming?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The thing about being the stable one is that you get very good at not letting your face answer before your brain does. I waited until I was sure. Then I said, "They know I'm here. I'm sure they'll come by." Priya's expression didn't change, but she adjusted my blanket when she left, a small, unnecessary gesture, and I understood it for what it was. Here's what had happened, and the way I had to piece it together from other people because I don't remember most of it. I was on a deadline. A client relaunch, a restaurant group based in Austin who wanted a full site overhaul in 11 days because they'd announced the new menu publicly before telling me the launch date. I'd been working 18-hour stretches, skipping meals the way you skip songs you don't want to hear, just hitting the button without thinking. My coffee intake had gone from reasonable to embarrassing. I was sleeping 4 hours and calling it fine because the work was getting done and the work was the thing that kept everything else moving. My family's mortgage. My parents had refinanced twice and the payment had been mine to cover for 3 years. Just temporarily. Just until things stabilized. Just until my father's back healed enough for him to go back to work. His back healed 8 months in. He didn't go back to work. That became the new baseline. Caden's latest loss, $17,000 from a tournament in Indiana that he told our mother was a sure thing. She'd told me I'd transferred the money in installments small enough that I didn't have to look at the full number at once. Miscellaneous. There's always miscellaneous. My aunt's car insurance, my cousin's community college application fee, my mother's dentist because she didn't have coverage and the molar had been hurting for months. "You're the only one who can," she'd say. And I'd think that's not the same as it being my responsibility, but I'd pay it anyway. I was at my desk when it happened, the Austin file open, cursor blinking in a style sheet I'd been staring at for 6 minutes without seeing. My hands were on the keyboard, but my fingers weren't moving. I remember thinking that was strange. I remember thinking I should get up and drink some water. I didn't get up. My downstairs neighbor heard the crash when I fell out of my chair. She called 911 and stayed on the line and held my hand in the elevator on the way down and rode in the ambulance with me even though I couldn't respond, and she barely knew my name. I know all of this because she told me later. She cried when she told me. She kept apologizing like she'd done something wrong by being the one who found me. Her name is Suri. I'd said maybe 8 words to her before that day. The diagnosis was dehydration severe enough to cause a seizure, combined with something the cardiologist called a stress-induced arrhythmia, which sounds clinical until someone explains that it means your heart loses its rhythm because the rest of you has been running so far past empty that your body eventually just pulls the emergency brake. I was in the hospital for 9 days. My family came on day 2, my mother, my father, and Caden. They stayed for 40 minutes. I know it was 40 minutes because Priya was on shift, and she told me afterward in that careful way she had, like she was weighing each word before she released it. What she said first was, "Your mother asked about your insurance." I said, "That sounds right." Then she said, "Your father wanted to know about your client contracts, whether someone else could pick them up while you were recovering." I stared at the ceiling for a while. Then I said, "I don't have a business partner." Priya was quiet. I heard her write something on her clipboard. I asked about Caden. I don't know why I expected different, but I asked. He didn't ask about anything, Priya said. He was on his phone. The thing is, I'd known. Some part of me had known for years what I was in that family. Not a daughter, not a sister, a resource. A stable, dependable resource who happened to have feelings, but the feelings were inconvenient, so we'd all quietly agreed not to look at them directly. I was the person you called when the account was short and the due date was tomorrow. I was not the person you called when something was wrong with me. Still, knowing something and having the proof of it sitting in a hospital chair for 40 minutes and then leaving are different weights. They left for a long weekend trip to a lake house in the Ozarks. Caden had one entry in some poker thing, invitation only, cabins and a private beach and a catered dinner. My mother said it's already paid for. What would be the point of staying? You're stable. The doctor said you're stable. Stable. I've heard that word applied to me my whole life, and it has never once been meant as a compliment. Day 3, Priya asked me if I wanted the television on. I said no. Then I said, "Do I have any other visitors?" She looked at me the way people look at someone when they're deciding what version of the truth to give them. Then she said, "There was someone last night. He didn't come in. He asked at the desk which room you were in, and then he stood in the hallway for a while. I didn't understand." "Who?" She checked something. "He gave his name at the front desk. Harlan Voss." I went very still. Harlan Voss was a name I had not heard spoken aloud in 11 years. It was a name my mother said with a specific kind of silence before and after it, a silence that meant we don't discuss this, and if you bring it up again there will be consequences. It was a name I had looked up once when I was 22, late at night, the way you search for things you're not sure you're allowed to want to know. I'd found a real estate firm in Portland, a professional headshot, a man who looked startlingly like my own jaw and my own forehead and my own eyes. I'd closed the tab and told myself I'd imagined the resemblance. "He just stood there?" I asked. Priya's voice was gentle. "He was there for about 2 hours. He didn't knock. He sat in the hall chair and he left around midnight. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there and I listened to the building breathe, and I thought about a man standing in a hallway for 2 hours and not knocking, and I couldn't figure out if that was love or cowardice or some particular combination of both that didn't have a name yet. He came back the next night, and the night after that. On day 5, Priya said he brought something. She held up a small paper bag. "A sandwich," she said, "from the deli across the street." He asked if you had dietary restrictions, and when I couldn't answer that, he said she probably likes salt and vinegar chips, and left the bag at the desk. I started crying before I understood why. Salt and vinegar chips. I hadn't eaten anything that tasted like something I'd chosen in 4 days. I hadn't been asked what I wanted in longer than I could count. And this man who had been standing in a hallway every night didn't know me, hadn't seen me in more than a decade, had no current working knowledge of who I was, and he had guessed correctly. I ate the whole bag, the sandwich too. That night I saw him. It was around 11. I'd asked a nurse to leave the door cracked. The corridor was mostly quiet, just the soft machinery of a building at rest, the occasional squeak of a shoe on linoleum. I was looking toward the door, not expecting anything, and I saw a figure stop at the edge of the glass panel and go still. Tall. Dark jacket. He stood with the careful posture of someone who understood he hadn't been invited. I lifted my hand. He didn't wave back. He just stood there for a moment with something on his face I couldn't fully read from that distance. Something that looked like relief. Like he'd been waiting to see that I could move. Then he went and sat in the chair in the hallway, and I watched his silhouette through the glass until I fell asleep. On day 7, he came in. He stayed near the door. He didn't sit down. He was maybe 55, 56. The kind of man who had clearly been something physical in his younger years and now carried it in his posture instead of his frame. His eyes were my eyes. I'd been looking at that headshot in my memory for 5 days, and there was no pretending otherwise. I said, "Why are you here?" Not a question, a test. He said, "I heard you were in the hospital. I didn't want you to be by yourself. Who told you?" He looked at the floor, then back at me. "A former colleague of your mother's. We've stayed in loose contact over the years. She thought I should know." I measured that. Why would she think that? He was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped. Outside, a cart rolled past. He said, "Because I asked her to let me know. If something happened, if you ever needed." He stopped. Started again. "I didn't have the right to show up in your life. I knew that. I agreed to that a long time ago when I shouldn't have. But I couldn't." His voice went tight. "I couldn't just not come," he said. We stayed in that silence for a while, the kind that has too much in it to be comfortable and too much in it to be empty. I said, "My mother has a name for you." A very specific silence. Before and after, he let out a breath. "I know." I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "Are you my father?" He didn't flinch from it. He said, "Yes. And I'm sorry it took me this long to be in the same room as you when I say it. My mother came back on day 9. She arrived at 9 in the morning, carry-on still rolling behind her, sunglasses pushed up on her head like she'd come straight from the car. She looked rested. Ozark's tan. Her mouth was set in the particular expression she uses when she's decided to be the reasonable one in a conversation. Harlan was in the room with me. He'd been there since 7, the first time he'd come in daylight. We were talking about Portland, about the firm he built, about what I'd been doing, the careful, polite conversation of two people who have years to catch up on and don't know which year to start with. My mother came through the door and stopped. The carry-on handle clicked as she let go of it. She said his name in that silence before and after way, and I realized I'd heard it my whole life as a curse, and it had taken me until this room to understand it was actually fear. "Harlan," she said. "What do you think you're doing?" He didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He said, "Being here," since apparently no one else was going to. Her eyes went to me like I'd committed a betrayal. Maya. I looked at her. I waited. I had learned how to wait in a hospital. You get very good at it. She said, "You don't understand the history. He doesn't get to just show up." I said, "He's been showing up every night since I got here. That's more than 40 minutes. Her face shifted, quick, involuntary, the math landing. She said, "I had to go. It was already paid for, the whole thing." "I know," I said. "You said." She stepped closer, pulling herself into the voice she uses when she wants to sound like the adult in the room. "The doctor said you were stable. There was nothing to be done by sitting here." I watched her face while she said it. I thought about 12 years of just until things stabilize, 12 years of transfers in silence and not asking for anything in return because asking would make me the difficult one. I thought about a man who had sat in a hallway chair every night for a week and brought me the right snack and cried quietly the morning I told him I'd found his headshot once and closed the tab. I said, "Mom, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen to them without making them about you." Her mouth opened. I kept going. I told her about the transfers, the total. I'd calculated it in the nights when I couldn't sleep, adding it up on my phone because I needed to see the number in one place rather than in the small pieces I'd always handed it over in. More than $70,000 in 9 years, not counting time, not counting the years of sleep. I told her about the Austin deadline, about the 18-hour days, about the fact that I had fainted at my desk and a neighbor I barely knew was the person who held my hand in the ambulance, not because my family was far away, but because my family was at a lake house. She said, "You never ask for help." I said, "I know. You raised me not to." Her face changed again. Something moved across it that I don't have a clean word for. Not guilt exactly, something older and more uncomfortable. I said, "I'm not asking for an apology right now. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you what's true and I need you to hold it." My father had appeared in the doorway. He looked at Harlan first, then at me. He had the expression he uses when a situation has moved outside his control and he's deciding whether to engage or retreat. He said, "What's going on in here?" My mother said, "She's talking." I told her I was changing my emergency contact. I told her the accounts she'd had access to were closed. I told her that the transfers were stopping and that the mortgage was no longer my responsibility, and that I understood this would cause problems and that those problems were not mine to solve. My father said, "After everything we've done for you," I said, "Name one thing." He was quiet. I said, "I want you to actually name one thing you've done for me in the last 5 years. He said, "We're your parents." I said, "That's a category, not an answer." Caden appeared behind him in the hallway, still in a sweatshirt, looking like he'd expected a different kind of morning. He looked at Harlan with the particular confusion of someone who doesn't recognize a face they've been kept from. He looked at me. He said, "Maya, what is this?" I said, "This is what happens when the stable one runs out." My mother's voice shifted into something sharper. "You're going to throw away this family over money," I said. "You turned this family into a transaction a long time ago. I'm just the last one to notice." She pointed at Harlan the way you pointed evidence. "He's filling your head. You don't know him." Harlan said, quietly and without drama, "I stood in that hallway for 7 nights. I didn't ask her for anything. I just wanted to make sure she wasn't alone. My mother said, 'You don't get credit for showing up now.'" He said, "I know. I'm not asking for credit. I'm asking her to know she has options." The room went quiet the way rooms do when something true has just been said and nobody's ready to agree with it. My mother looked at me. The sunglasses were still pushed up on her head. Her carry-on was still in the middle of the floor. For a moment she looked very tired, and I could see in her face the particular kind of tired that comes from carrying a version of yourself for a very long time. She left without saying anything else. My father followed. Caden stood in the doorway a moment longer, and I thought he might say something, but he just shook his head and followed them out. The room felt like it had exhaled. Priya appeared with fresh water, which she set on my tray table without comment. She gave my shoulder one brief, efficient squeeze and then left, which was the exact right thing to do. Harlan sat back down. He put his hands on his knees. He said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "I think I'm going to be." He nodded. "That's different from okay," he said, "but it's better than I expected." I was discharged 2 days later. I arranged it myself. My own paperwork, my own signature, my own car service to my apartment because Suri offered to drive me and I said no because I needed the 15 minutes alone in the backseat to let my face do what it needed to do without anyone watching. There are things I'm still working through. I don't think I'll ever have a simple relationship with guilt. It was built into me like a load-bearing wall, and you can't just take those out without understanding which parts of the structure they're holding up. I still catch myself doing the math, calculating what I owe, feeling the pull of the phone when it rings, and the particular ringtone I'd set for my mother. I picked up once. 2 weeks after discharge early evening, standing in my kitchen making actual food for the first time in longer than I wanted to count. She said, "We need to talk about the mortgage." I said, I know. 2 words. I'd been practicing them. She said, "You can't just." I said, "I have a new financial advisor. You'll want to make other arrangements. She can give you referrals for mortgage counseling if that would help." The silence on the other end of the line had a texture I recognized. It was the silence before the pivot, before she found the angle, before she decided which version of herself to use. I didn't wait for it. I said, "I love you, Mom. I'm going to hang up now." And I did. Harlan and I have been talking every Sunday. It started with a 40-minute call about nothing in particular and has turned into something I don't have a category for yet, something between getting to know someone and remembering someone you always suspected was out there. He doesn't push. He answers what I ask and stops there. He doesn't try to explain away the years that didn't happen. He just shows up to the years that are happening now. Last Sunday, he asked what I wanted to do with the next part of my life. Not the career part, not the financial part, just what do you want? I sat with it. Outside my window, a kid was teaching himself to skateboard on the sidewalk, falling and getting up in that single minded way of someone who hasn't learned yet to be afraid of looking stupid. I said, I want to stop building things for other people and start building something for myself. He was quiet on the other end of the line, not empty quiet, the kind that means someone is listening hard. Then he said, that sounds like a start. I wrote it down after we hung up. I'm not sure why. I'm not a person who journals. But that sentence felt like something I needed to keep somewhere outside my own head, somewhere I could find it when the old wiring fired up and I started doing the math again. The thing nobody tells you about being the stable one is that stability is not the same as fine. I was stable for 12 years. I was not fine. The stable ones carry everything quietly and nobody checks the weight because they never complain about it. And eventually, when the weight gets heavy enough, the stable ones end up on a hospital floor while their family is at a lake house asking about client contracts. I don't know what my family is now. My mother calls sometimes. My father doesn't. Caden sent me a text 3 weeks ago that said, heard you're doing better, and I responded thanks, and neither of us followed up. And that felt about right for where we are. I know Suri's name now. We've had coffee twice. She's a nurse practitioner, has a cat with an enormous personality, and once walked across Spain on a pilgrimage because she needed, she said, to be somewhere with no Wi-Fi and no expectations. I think about that sometimes. I think about what it means to choose who you let into the room, not just the hospital room, every room. Who gets access to the version of you that's tired, that doesn't have it together, that collapsed at her desk on a Tuesday because she had been running on empty for 9 years and nobody noticed or nobody said so? Harlan stood in that hallway for 7 nights. He didn't have rights to the room. He didn't ask for rights to the room. He just wanted to make sure the room wasn't empty. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet way you think about things when you're standing in your kitchen making actual food and realizing you can't remember the last time you did that without a deadline running in the background. What I lived for 12 years had a logic to it. I gave and they took, and because nothing broke visibly, we all agreed it was working. That's how these arrangements survived so long. Not because anyone is happy with them, but because the person doing the giving has been taught to treat their own discomfort as a character flaw rather than a signal. I was so convinced that needing things was the problem that I turned myself into someone who didn't need anything. And then my body had a different opinion about that on a Tuesday afternoon, and I ended up on a hospital floor with a stranger holding my hand in an elevator. That's the part I keep coming back to. Suri didn't owe me anything. She barely knew my name. But she stayed on the line and rode in the ambulance and came to visit twice after I was discharged, and she did all of it without calculating whether I'd return the favor. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. The choices I made over 9 years had consequences I wasn't willing to look at directly. Every transfer, every covered bill, every time I said I'll figure it out instead of I can't do this anymore, those weren't just financial decisions. They were decisions about what I believed I was worth. And what I believed, somewhere underneath the stability and the competence and the client deadlines, was that my worth was conditional, that I had to earn my place in my own family by being useful enough, quiet enough, available enough. That's not something someone told me in one conversation. It accumulated. It was in every silence after I hesitated, every pivot back to Caden's needs, every time my mother said, "You're the strong one," like it was a gift instead of an assignment. The strength it took to say stop was the same strength I'd been spending on everyone else for a decade. I just had to decide it was mine to spend differently. Harlan stood in a hallway for 7 nights because he understood something about what it means to show up when you have no standing to demand anything. He didn't come in until I was ready. He didn't explain himself until I asked. He brought the right snack because he'd been paying attention from a distance for years, and paying attention is its own form of love even when it can't fully reach you yet. What he modeled, without trying to, was that real presence doesn't announce itself or ask for credit. It just stays. I think about who I want to be on the other side of this, not a different person, just a more honest version of the one I already am. Someone who knows that setting a limit isn't the same as giving up on people. Someone who understands that you can love your family and still refuse to disappear inside of them. Someone who has learned, slowly and at some cost, that the people worth keeping in the room are the ones who don't need you to be useful in order to stay. I wrote that down on a Sunday after a call with Harlan. I'm not sure I fully believe it yet, but I'm working on it, and working on it, I've decided, is enough.